Keats's Ode to a Nightingale was composed May 1819, and it's one of his most beautiful odes. The nightingale has been a stock figure for many of the Romantics and pre-Romantics in the 18th and early 19th centuries. And so Keats is really relying upon this institution of allusion, which goes all the way back to Greek myth, but he's also reinventing the nightingale in really interesting ways. The poem traces the rise and fall of an imaginative flight of fancy that is occasioned by the beauty of the nightingale. It's a very interesting poem in that it's not grounded in so much a local space as Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey is, for instance, or even in a time or place as Coleridge's Frost at Midnight is. It's instead grounded in this drowsy, sensuous experience with the beauty of the nightingale's song. And we'll see here that what predominates as the sense is not really vision, as is predominant in Wordsworth, but it's really sound. So let's look at Keats's Ode to a Nightingale. My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains my sense. Again, we have these present verbs. Aches, pains. As though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains 1 minute past, and leathwards had sunk. Hemlock, of course, being a poison, the poison that killed Socrates. As though he had drunk hemlock, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains, opiate being made of the poppy flower. So this has a botanical, natural connotation here, which is then exchanged for the mythological, culminating here in the Lethe words had sunk. Lethe was the river, according to Greek mythology, where the souls would pass. When they passed or drank from the river, they would forget their past life. And so there's this forgetfulness, there's this drunkenness, there's this medicinal state with which the speaker is comparing this experience. 'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thine happiness. So now he's made an address. He's addressing a thou, thy happy lot, in this compulsive repetition. This polyptoton, this change of form from happy to happiness, this exchange with that root word, that's thou, light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beechen green, and shadows numberless, singest of summer in full-throated ease. Dryad, again, we're in the world of Greek myth, as well as this very natural landscape. A dryad was a spirit of the trees, and in some ways, some critics have noted that this is tautology and perhaps an unnecessary repetition. A dryad is, by its very nature, of the trees, so why say dryad of the trees? But it lends something to the texture of this poem, I think. In some melodious plot of beechen green, that important word green, and shadows numberless, sings, and in this phrase, in full-throated ease, just no inhibition with its song. This image overlaps this idea of the throat, the nightingale's throat, exchanged here for this similarly sonic word draught. Oh, says the speaker, for a draught of vintage. Throat and draught, but this throat can't sing. It doesn't sing. It wants to drink. It wants to take in now. Oh, for a draught of vintage, wine, that hath been cooled a long age in the deep delved earth. Now notice the extreme seclusion, first of the dryad of the trees, this songster in the night, this nightingale. He's away, hidden, sealed in this retired seclusion. And now the speaker, desiring for a taste of that seclusion, wants wine from a similarly secluded place. It's almost like these senses are overlapping, because he says, tasting of Flora, who's the goddess of spring, and the country green, dance, Provençal song, and sunburnt mirth. We have this blending of senses, Flora, then of color, then of motion, then of sound, and then of emotion, mirth. Oh, for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful hippocrene, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim, and purple stained mouth. Oh, for a beaker of warm south. This is a metonym for a beaker of southern wine. And then look at this incisive specificity here with beaded bubbles winking at the brim. This beautiful, just textured plosives here with the repetition of the B sound. And purple stained mouth. It's just very embodied. And in this desire for this sequestered experience, this sensuousness, desires to drink that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim. It's a nice little chime with fade and away, rather there, that A, rhyming with the fade, and this internal linking there of the assonance. But it's very much a sonic experience. Sonic almost at the expense of the ocular experience. It's not vision, it's unseen. Just like Coleridge uses that strange word unquiet. Notice too, just the structure here, he's using a quatrain of Shakespearean sonnets, Shakespearean quatrain, and he ends it with a Petrarchan sestet. Two very different pieces of two different kinds of sonnets. Moving on, he repeats that word. They're interlinked here. The end of this stanza, falling upon this one, fade far away and dissolve, and quite forget what thou among the leaves hast never known. He's contrasting his human existence with that of the birds. And what has the bird never known? The weariness, the fever, and the fret. Ah, what does this remind us of? If you've just read Tintern Abbey, you'll recognize this from Wordsworth. You might hear an echo of Wordsworth, the fretful stir unprofitable, and the fever of the world hath hung upon the beatings of my heart. To Tintern, again, Keats, he knows this. He's not plagiarizing. This is an allusion. That's the difference between an allusion and a plagiarism. The poet is relying upon you to remember this piece from Wordsworth, so it can inform and enrich the lines. Here, where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last grey hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is but to be full of sorrow and laden-eyed despairs. The existence of the state of human awareness is necessarily plagued by not only pain, but an awareness of that pain. It's partly what Keats is saying is distinctive of the human experience, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. Lustrous, meaning bright, but look too, this very 17th century style of personification. Keats really resides within the 17th century, within the 17th century dramas, sometimes even the late 16th century, and he's just in love with these figures of personification, and this very new form of personification he's introducing into the Romantic era is different. It's very different, and you'll see this in To Autumn as well, where Autumn is personified. Her hair hath lifted on the winnowing wind. It's just a strange figure, beautiful figure. So there's Keats's personification of beauty and love. They will not stay, cannot stay long, not beyond tomorrow. Beauty cannot keep its bright eyes. And now this away, away. We've heard the word twice already, and now it's here together. Instead of fade away, fade far away, here we have calling on this turn, this wistful away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his pards, but on the viewless wind, but on the viewless wings of poetry. You see, I just made a mistake, but Wordsworth has a line, the viewless winds. There's a visionary motion that attends the viewless winds. I don't think Keats is referencing that here. But again, this priority on the sound at the expense of vision. It's viewless wings of poetry. It's sonic. Though the dull brain perplexes and retards, Dull brain, there's something very medical about that. Just like in the first stanza we had dull opiate. It seems very scientific too. Instead of to say dull mind or dull hemlock, he would say dull opiate, dull brain, which is very physiological, this word. It's an organ of the body. They're all about the experience in the body, perplexes and retards. Already with thee, tender is the night. So notice, what we have here is this speech act of resolution. He's made a resolve, away, I will fly, and he's making this imaginative flight now, and looking up, and haply the Queen Moon is on her throne. Moon, key figure for Coleridge's Nightingale poem, clustered round by all her starry fays. But here, here's this turn, but here there is no light. He's in a world of darkness, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown through verdurous glooms and winding mossy ways. And just let me fix this because it should be, the ways should end on that. So there's no light except, save, from what is heaven blown with the breezes, how the breeze will move the light and shade upon the forest floor through verdurous glooms, green glooms, and winding mossy ways. And now, after he's looked up in this imaginative flight, he's seen the moon with all her starry phase. Now he looks down, moving down, looking up here, and now he's turning downward as if dazzled. If you've ever been outside on a bright moonlit night, you look at the moon, you look back down, and it's darker than before. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs. I mean, this is interesting. The presence of the fruit, instead of saying the fruit, it's only sensuously acknowledged here by this incense, the smell of the fruit hanging upon the boughs, not the fruit itself, because it's a very phenomenological experience. It's subjective. It's his experience, but instead, in embalmed darkness, guess each sweet wherein the seasonable month endows the grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild. To the presence of all of this botanical splendor, we have not the sight of it, but the presence according to smell. This is something that Wordsworth and other romantics don't really play upon. Their primary senses is that of eye and ear. But Keats, he gets into the very textures of the real world, and he's interested in not just what can be seen or heard, but what can be smelled and felt and tasted. And interesting too, these fruit trees, we saw in Tintern Abbey how the unripe fruit were losing themselves amidst the green, the one green hue. Here it's a pervasive darkness, a verdurous gloom, and not really green, bright green. But they're lost in the darkness. White hawthorn and the pastoral eglantine, or the sweetbriar rose, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming musk rose, full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. I love this, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. He's got the memory and attention of botanists. What's so striking about this poem is just this blending of imagination and the ideal with this very specific portrayal of the real world of nature. Darkling, I listen. So now he's listening. And for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death. Just want to real quick go back. Darkling, interesting adverb, very Keatsian. It actually comes from Milton. Milton's "The wakeful bird sings darkling." So this is Milton's adverb, but he's bringing it in here. I've been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many a mused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. He wants death to, this is a strange image is going to come back, to take into the air my quiet breath, the leaving of the breath from the body into the air, which is linked imagistically with what will happen with the nightingale, how he describes the nightingale here. Now more than ever seems it rich to die. to cease upon the midnight with no pain. Remember that pain from line 1. Death is now not really something to be avoided, but something that releases the soul, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. So the image of death as his quiet breath going into the air, and the soul of the nightingale being poured forth upon the winds through its song. A strange parallel there, in such ecstasy. This literally means standing, stasis, out, ecstasy. It means to stand outside the body. And this is exactly what the Nightingale's song is doing. It's a projection of the self into the audible world. And so it's a standing outside in ecstasy. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a sod. You notice how this stanza was predominantly about the speaker's self, this I listening, in his love with an easeful death, half in love. And this experience is parallel with the song and death. And moving down, in the next stanza, he turns from self back to nightingale. Thou wast not born for death, establishing a contrast. Immortal bird, no hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. And then this transhistorical speculation, perhaps the self-same song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth, when, sick for home, she stood in tears amid the alien corn. The bird's song, the nightingale's song, is now a link to the past. There's this, he's tapping into some kind of transhistorical moment where it's linking his present moment to not only history, ancient days, but also to biblical prophecy. Sad heart of Ruth, coming from the book of Ruth, who, Gentile woman who goes to Israel, stands amid the foreign wheat, who eventually will marry and become Jewish, and is actually one of the ancestors to Jesus Christ himself. And so it's linking it even within not just history, myth, Bible, but also redemptive history in a strange way. The saying that oft times hath charmed magic casements, opening on the foam of perilous seas in fairy lands forlorn. And we have this F texture throughout. Magic casements opening on the foam. I don't know. I think this has to do with Arthurian romances. Perhaps with Tristram and Isolde, who drank the magic potion when they were in the boat, made them fall in love with each other. Perhaps this, but it's something that's national, biblical, historical. It's transpersonal, spanning time and space. But then what happens? Fairy lands forlorn. Suddenly, the spell is broken. Forlorn. For the very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my soul self. I mean, remember this triad of stress, half the I am and then a spondy, but toll, the echo of that forlorn throughout the line with toll and soul, yoking those two ideas of the sound and also the extreme solitude. Adieu, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do, deceiving elf. Adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows. The song, the bird is moving on, invisibly to some other melodious plot, leaving the speaker over the still stream, up the hillside. And now 'tis buried deep in the next valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep? Interesting how he ends on this new problem. Oftentimes the poems will return upon the same moment in which the poem began, or the same place rather, with a sense of resolution. And what's happened here is he was alone in the darkness, heard the bird, took this imaginative flight, away, away, for I will fly to thee. He's within this flight of fancy, and then suddenly he's told back. And what occurs is this, I think he's struck by the sharp opposition between the ideal experience with that beautiful encounter with the song itself, and then suddenly back to the human world that was so sharply contrasted to the bird's song earlier in the poem. And it's like that snap back where he's told back to his soul self is suddenly so visceral, so violent, that his states of consciousness are confused. He's discombobulated. He's bewildered. Do I wake or sleep? And this is probably the most similar to the greater romantic lyric, simply because it begins in one space, takes this meditative flight, and then returns again to the same place. But the tension was not so much really resolved. It presented its own kind of dilemma, which is strange. So Keats is almost an outlier in these 4 poems that we're looking at in this series. I hope this was helpful, and thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.